Hello. If you're watching this right now, you are watching This Week in Amplio. My name is Ryan Erickson. I'm the host of This Week in Amplio, and the star of the show, as every week, is Al Shalloway. Al's somewhere around here. I think he might be down. Oh, he's on the bottom of my screen. Oh, Al, how are you doing?
Hey there, I'm doing great, actually. How are you doing?
Oh, fantastic. I am really jazzed. I got off a wonderful call with someone who I just met who is
Cool.
as much into music as I am and kind of digs what I'm trying to do in the world. And it was awesome to be there. So I'm ready to play, ready to support you in this space. What are you
You
ready
know,
for?
since our session a few weeks ago when we talked about how you can make mistakes while you're playing an instrument and use that to riff into something else, I
Yeah.
think of you every time I make a mistake playing the piano, which is pretty often.
Well, hopefully it is with a feeling of grace and that
It
we
is.
move right along.
It
So,
is. It is. I remember the story you told about Miles Davis and stuff. So, yes.
oh,
And it's so
wonderful.
true. It's so true. You just have to riff with life too. Anyway,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm excited about being here today because I think I'm getting to the heart of the matter of some things that I think are insane. I mean, I really do. Insanity is the only way I can say it, and that's maybe harsh, but um, oh, it looks like somehow I do have the comments. That's good to see. Anyway, hi everybody, um, and it's interesting because there was a guy I like a lot, Thomas Maloche, put a post out where we're talking to um, about a CTO, I think it was, who was doing insane stuff, like measuring lines of code, see how developers. Now we know that's not effective, but somebody, and he was trying to pose the question, what has them do this? Like, why do they do
Mm.
this? Instead of just saying, oh, it's another stupid CTO. And somebody said, this is so insane, the guy should just be fired. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's a little harsh, but the guy got there, nepotism does not explain every CTO's ascendance to their position. I'm sorry. It's not the truth. We
Yeah.
like to think about that some, but that's not the way it is.
Mm.
And the point is, if you've never been exposed to something or you've never worked in a particular field, you don't even know the basic stuff. And when I read that, and the thing, I have a background, I admit, of hating this anti-management, C-level stuff in the field. And I actually wrote something about it. Some of it I think is yesterday. Some of it I think is fueled by the fear of layoffs, the change in the industry, and all that. But the reality is, we have to, instead of being afraid of we're going to get laid off, and the reason we're getting laid off, maybe a lot of it is bad management, but there's not this perceived value add. If people could clearly demonstrate the value they provided, you wouldn't get laid off. But we can't.
Yeah, that came up a lot in this whole "this is an agile coach" or "no such thing as an agile coach" theme about, well, why are agile coaches getting fired? Because really, there's no such thing as an agile coach because people don't buy agile; they buy people who can deliver value. I think that's exactly what
Exactly,
you're saying.
exactly. And the fact is that when Agile came out, it was a massive shift in thinking and it was very powerful and it was very useful. But really, within 3 or 4 years, it kind of met its match. And the reason it happened is, well, two things, I guess. One is that at the beginning, it was early adopters and innovators that were doing it. And I mean, look at the people who are at the at Snowbird at the manifesto that signed the manifesto. I mean, these are heavy hitters.
Yeah,
These are amazingly heavy hitters. And when I looked at XP, and I love XP, by the way, when I look at XP, one of the issues I actually said about it that would have is, look, anybody who's got Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, Ron Jeffries, Chat, any team that has that, I mean, these are gods. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
of course it works. And it
yeah.
does work. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a god, but I used it and very effectively, and it actually helped me a lot. But you take it to people who don't have the experience, and even when I used it, I'd already had 30 years of programming experience
Yeah.
because I started in 1970, 71, around that time. And what you have to do is look at how people interact with the approach. And it's
Mhm.
ironic to me, and I call it insane. It's more than ironic. Agile is supposed to be about people, but then we ignore how people interact with defined systems, how people interact with frameworks, how people interact with all these things called agile that we're doing. And people interact with things in a way you better pay attention to. So if you find the same things going over and over again, instead of yelling and screaming that people are misunderstanding or not following it correctly, you have to pay attention to why is that. So anyway, let me finish my point on this. For the viewers who don't know me, but I think most of the people out there do, I've got what I like to call rapid mind movement, but the clinical diagnosis is attention deficit disorder. So I
Yeah,
pander all
me
over the place.
too.
You've noticed that behavior. I've got a
Well,
mild case, so I don't mean to people have serious cases that can be very serious. Okay.
yeah,
But anyway,
and people need support and
that's
understanding
right.
for sure.
That's right. I'm fortunate. In fact, actually, I think the mild case I have is why I do what I do. That's why I made it a positive rapid mind movement. That's a good thing to me. But anyway,
Mm.
so there was this person should be fired. Everybody knows this. Okay. Except in the agile space, there are two things that I think are equally insane that nobody even questions. I mean, I've been ranting about it for a long time, but just a little bit. I just a little rant.
Just a little rant.
And those two things are that we don't run diagnoses to see what needs to fix our problems. Instead, we pick a framework, we pick an approach that's
Mm-hmm.
prescriptive. So you got two problems all at one here. See, a prescriptive framework, if it's immutable, if you have to do it, then it's prescriptive. That's what prescriptive means, that you have to do this. Now, prescription isn't bad. It's what you're prescriptive on. Like I think I've mentioned this before. Physics has prescriptions in it. They're called the laws of physics. We've studied them.
Mm-hmm.
We analyze them. We are always trying to break them and improve them, as a matter of fact. But as I've said before, if you show me an invention that you purport that breaks the laws of thermodynamics, I'm not going to believe you. And if
Not
you ask me to,
yet present.
yeah, I mean, if you know, if you can really do that, then demonstrate it. You'll have all the money you want.
Yeah, time machine. Yeah, if you can,
You
if
know,
you can fly. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not possible with our present knowledge of how the world works. So if you can prove our present knowledge of how the world works is not right, then hey, I'll listen. Show me evidence, and show me evidence by doing it. So there are things that are immutable at the moment. Okay, the laws will change. You know, Newtonian physics is different than Einsteinian physics, but again, Einstein physics is really only applicable in certain areas. You know, I mean, it's our day-to-day life. It actually it's present everywhere, but it only shows up like as Newtonian physics for us. So
What? Well, and they're the string theorists, and they're the chaos theorists,
that's
and
right.
all this
That's
kind of
right.
stuff that comes after, and that Einstein wouldn't buy it. Einstein was not in on those
That's right.
newer forms.
And this is interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't been thinking along those lines, but when you have all these different theorists out there, the reason is that sometimes how you look at the problem defines what you can see about the problem. So we have these different bodies of knowledge, not so much, I'm not sure about Einstein's case, but what's his name? You know, the physicist who was paralyzed.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, Hawking. I watched some things about him. I've read some of his stuff, and it was very interesting that he would not study some things not because he knew they were wrong. He didn't take that attitude. He got, that's not where I'm going to get the best benefit. So he was open-minded, but not going down some of these things just because he was trying to do something else. And that's certainly fine. You know, we have to put our emphasis in different areas. But the point is that immutability, that you have to attend to things. Like, to me, there are certain laws, like clean code ideas. I'm not saying exactly everything in clean code is right, but the idea that there are certain things you do, like some form of test first in my mind. How do you write tests to separate them? There's some things that are just like the law of quality code that's maintainable. And it's been mostly ignored in the agile space. I mean, there are a lot of experts out there, but most people aren't doing it because they don't understand it.
Well, these are standards of practice, measures of quality, and all those kinds of things that, and this I think maybe goes into the idea of being prescriptive in certain places. If there's a team of folks who are expert software developers who have a knowledge of practice, who can teach, who can show junior developers what quality means and why and how, and the understanding of that. I mean, and now of course those things happen within the team, as opposed to being prescribed at a larger level that may not be appropriate, such as in the imposition of a framework like Scrum, SAFe, or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We were talking about the open. I may be saying it wrong. Open Beta Codex, is that it?
Open Space Beta,
Open
yes.
Space Beta. Could you put up the book you said I should start with?
Yes. This
Yeah,
is
I got the other one, but I'm gonna buy that. The reason I put this out, this is something definitely to investigate. Okay. I don't know it, so I'm not endorsing it, except I do know Niels. He knows it and he endorses it.
yeah. I helped edit it, so there you go.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Let me put it this way: it's good stuff. I don't
Yeah.
believe there's any one way to go anywhere, but that's like a shiny. That's another path. Okay, I know I'm somewhat consistent with, because that map you've got in the back, I definitely know that stuff, and organized for complexity, Neil's work, and all that. Anyway, let me get back to this other piece. So the CTO who should be fired because he's so stupid and ignorant, da 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 da. Well, if you ask me, taking pre-canned solutions from someplace else that's not your situation without even running a diagnosis is as insane and as crazy, and yet it's widespread. You get a little heart murmur, and you go to the doctor and say, "Hey doc, you're my guy, I need you to do open heart surgery on me." It's not very good. And you want to do a diagnosis. They'll see, is it heartburn, is it any number of things. I actually have an injury from when I was a teenager that sometimes feels like heart pain. I've got a separated muscle just under my just above actually where the heart is. I've learned to tell when it's muscle pain, and I've studied the symptoms of heart. I know it also has the shoulder and stuff like
The
that.
sternum area you're
No, it's to
talking
the
about
left
there?
of it. It's right above the heart. I have a
Um,
partially separated muscle. It was never attached because it grew back.
hmm.
And it mostly doesn't bother me, but sometimes it acts up. So if I went to a heart doctor and he didn't do a diagnosis, he would give me a problem. Oh, thanks. Yeah, Thomas. So the point is, not running a diagnosis is insane to me, because you don't know what's going on. And here's the other interesting thing I've noticed, and I'll mention doctors as an example, but promoters of approaches do the same thing. In fact, it's interesting. Watch Top Gun 2. It's very interesting to watch Top Gun 2.
Oh, Top
There's
Gun,
an
the new
interesting
one,
lesson. What?
the new Maverick? Is
Maverick.
that the
Yeah,
one?
Top Gun
Okay.
Maverick. Okay, it's very interesting. So they have this thing they have to bomb, right? And they're asking a Navy pilot what he would do. Now, what is a Navy pilot's number one go-to approach? You get in the best aircraft you can and you bomb the hell out of it. So of course that's what he's going to say to
Yeah.
do. There's so many other ways that thing could have been taken out.
Yeah.
And it's a good movie. I like the movie, but it just shows, if what you know how to do is, if you're asked, well, how to solve a problem, you're going to look at at the solutions you have
The
instead of.
patterns you've identified and the
That's right.
specific approaches that you've seen success with in the
That's right.
contexts that you are aware of.
And people need solutions. So the thing is, we have these two things going hand in hand that I think are equally crazy. One is that we don't do diagnoses, but we take prescriptive frameworks and put them there. And the problem with the prescriptive framework is, by definition, excuse me, the problem with an immutable framework, and Scrum says it's immutable. SAFe is more or less immutable. Why? See, here's where immutability, I don't care if you call it immutable or not immutable. It's immutable if you can't change it without knowing a change will be an improvement. It's like a house of cards. So Scrum says don't change it because it's all built to work together. In fact, it's interesting. When XP first came out, the very first XP Explained book, first version 1, they said you got to use all these to get almost all the value. And I said, no. I mean, it's good. I love XP. I loved XP then. When I first discovered XP, December '99, I remember exactly where it was. It was at the
Yeah.
at the Munich. There was a Munich conference. I forget what it was called, but it was a conference in Munich in '00. And Martin Fowler was presenting on XP, and there was this super buzz about it, and everybody was talking about how amazing it was, and it was so overflowed. I couldn't get in, so I learned it by not being at a session.
Yeah.
But I heard about it. I said, "Wow, this is really amazing." So I started talking to people, and what I realized is and I do mean every practice in XP I had been doing, but individually. I was not doing XP. I want to be clear about this. Doing individual practices don't make up a system. But over, from like 83 is when I'd started doing some of those practices, automated testing and some things like that, test first, things like that. I'd done them, but here and there and here and there. So I wasn't doing XP. But I'd done everything, and I said, wow, this is amazing. They put it all together, and it makes so sense. And why didn't I do this? Actually wondered about that. But, well, I'm not as smart as Kent, I suppose, or Ward. But the point is that, the system, in fact, my RMM is hitting me. I think I forgot what my point was. But, so like what happened is with XP, it was like, it was originally right. It was originally said you've got to do these things. And I remember making the case, no, you don't have to do these things. Pairing has advantages. I don't care what you're doing. Thinking of how to write your test has advantage, even if you're not writing the test, just thinking about the test. And actually they changed it, and I don't know if it's because of me or just realization, but I remember.
Of course it's because of you. Why would it not be because?
The XP Explained Edition 2 came off that edge. It was like all these practices are good, and you get the most value as you add them, but it's not so much exponential, no value until you get to the end.
Well, I think, and then I'll pause you there for just a second, because we're talking about prescription, we're talking about practices, we're talking about things that are, we're also talking kind of immutability and adaptability. All these things together. And not every organization is designed for pairing. Not every team, as it is designed in an organization, in the organizational system that surrounds the team, is designed to do test first. And for goodness sake, Woody Zool probably would not agree with me, but mobbing doesn't work everywhere.
No, he would agree with you. Woody is amazing. Woody, I love Woody. He is I love him as a person first, and I love him as a technical thinker, just right up there. I mean, he's just such a great teddy bear guy. I love him. If you're ever in San Diego area, look him up. He loves chatting with people. He's brilliant. No, he's the one who came up with no estimates. And he says no estimates is something that's contextual. It's a way to challenge the estimates. Mobbing, he didn't design mobbing and then try it. It just happened. He tells the story where he went to a company that couldn't get anything done. And he just did that. Like, he started to do it for an hour or two. Let's get everybody together, but it worked. And they just kept doing it the rest of the day, moving through different conference rooms. And then they found they liked how to do the work. And all of a sudden they can unblock everything. Mobbing is a good thing. I generally think it's a great thing, but but you have to also attend not just to the company. Look, let's be candid. A lot of people got into programming so they wouldn't have to work with other people. I know I did that. Yeah. I know I did that. I was, when I was in college, I was in theoretical mathematics, which you mostly do your theorems in your head or at a board by yourself. Then you have to prove it to other people. Or I was programming. I was programming about 40 hours a week, starting from my freshman year in college. And most of my interactions were with a few close friends, my girlfriend, and I did support at the computer center because there weren't that many of us who knew computers, and I did. But it was only later when I had a life-changing event in '83 that I realized I really liked people. I was just afraid of them. Terrified would be a more normal word to use. I went from being a very strong introvert to, I guess I'm extroverted now. But that has a lot to do with my wife of 36 years. She is like just this great out there with people. You be around that long enough, it changes.
The balance, the other side, the polarities between.
We do talk about the polarity. We were called the high tech. That was me, and high touch. He used to be a school counselor and a massage therapist before that. And the difference is she's made me a better person, and I've made her a white as ass. It's true.
Thanks.
But
Thanks,
I
Al.
like, I appreciate smart ass people. So it's a good
Yeah.
thing, right? So, but anyway, coming back to this. So the question is, what is, if prescriptions aren't good, then immutable frameworks aren't good because they're prescriptive. But it's really worse than all this. It's because it's not like, oh, this is a good start. That's what I admit, I kind of hate the excuses that are given, like it's a good start or something. Well, if it's a good start, a better start would be something you can start with. Would a better thing would be something you could start with that then you could keep going with, not something you have to abandon because you get locked
Well,
into it.
Well, I think this is where the issue of imposition comes in, and that okay, thou shalt do Scrum, thou shalt
Yeah,
do it in
right.
this way. And we're going to measure and manage how you have your meetings. We're going to measure and manage all this stuff, and you're going to do story points, and you must do that. And if you don't do it, you're going to get docked in your individual performance review. Blah 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 blah. All the
That's right.
stuff that I hate. Now, the other part. Now, when I would approach coaching again, when I would start again thinking from a Scrum perspective. Like Scrum is the form, right? So I didn't think of it as Scrum, but there's transparency, inspection, and adaptability, right? Those three pillars, we would say. And the conversation for me would be, well, how much transparency do you want? How much transparency? What supports that transparency? Scrum can do it this way. You can get transparency in a lot of different ways. And how much inspection do you do? Right. And are you inspecting to get the transparency you want? And what are the practices? What are the patterns? What are the things that happen in your organization? Do you want to keep them? Do they keep this? Do they keep you moving forward and making progress? And then how much adaptability can you support? Is your organization designed? Right, then we're talking about organizational design and organizational context. How do those three things fit together? Okay, maybe that means we can do the rules, roles, events, and artifacts, and they will give us what we want to have and how we define success and progress. So that would be my approach to say
Yeah.
Scrum can be this a little bit of a mini buffet that you could use to do that. Now, of course, we both know that Amplio provides a much wider frame and array and details around that. So
Yeah, you bring up really, really, really important and critical issues to attend to, because a lot of the organization uh, has an impact on people. And I want to actually say something about imposition, because imposition may or may not be a bad thing. Well, in some cases, it's not a bad thing. In other words, imposing the laws of physics on somebody designing a bridge is a good idea. Okay. In other words, imposing reality, that's a good thing. Imposing you have to do it this way is probably not a good thing. But let's look at why it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for three reasons. One is it may be the wrong thing because you don't know what you should be imposing. Okay. But so that definitely is true. But sometimes you do know, like if you're a software engineer who's building something for the FDA and the FDA is involved and they need to see what you're doing, then that imposition is valid because that governance is valid, because otherwise the company can never release the thing. So impositions also that people have to agree to work in a certain way so you can collaborate. Okay, I know I'm hitting a button here. That's okay.
No, it's okay. No, please. But I mean, that's an organizational context. So go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So that the reality of the world and organizational context, those are important. But however, safety is important. See, this is the interesting thing. If you tell a team that you have to test first and they don't know what test first and they're scared of test first and they think their job is on the line if they fail in test first, that's bad. Because now the context of the organization is creating fear. However, I think, and this is a thought experiment, I've never done this. I wished I had 15 years ago when I had the money to try it. Is I actually believe if you told the team, look, we're going to always run our tests, but we're always going to write our tests before we write any code. And let me tell you, I know this might slow you down. So I am not going to give you grief if it slows you down. Consider this as onboard learning. Consider this in the workplace learning. We want to see how writing tests, before slows you down. And then I want you to tell me how it's working against you when it does, but let's at least try it as an experiment to see what's going on. Now, I happen to know it's going to speed things up because there are things inherent about writing tests. The way you think about writing tests first changes how you design. I remember conversations back in 2000 on the XP programming group, which was where the agile people were more, because even though Scrum came before, XP was the hot agile, pre-agile thing before the manifesto. And I remember coining the term testability, saying that good tests make for higher quality designed code. That if you write your test to be testable, your code's better. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked again. I'll blame it on the squirrels from my RMM. But but the point is this, is that, so there are the three things. So there's the people, there's the organization, you've got to drive out the fear, there's the imposition of reality. These all make sense, but an immutability that's because these are our values or our things don't make sense. And the thing about Scrum that bothers me, when you say inspect and adapt, you bring up a lot of issues. You need way more than inspect and adapt. There's so much there's so much evidence that if people don't understand, they will resist it. I mean, you can have all the data in the world. If they don't understand it, the Semmelweis example I keep bringing up.
Yeah.
So this follow to understand causes resistance. It's basically teaching adults pedantically as if they were kids. They don't like it. Kids don't like it either, by the way.
It's why music gets killed out of people, is that you just do this because you're going to do it, and there's no even any attempt to explain the reasoning behind it. There's theory behind this, and to go slow to go fast, right? And so I think it would be splitting hairs. I say the imposition of reality. Well, absolutely. How can you can't change the objective reality? That's fine.
That's right.
I think where it comes in terms of resistance and understanding, and so this practice is we're going to do this framework just because. And I think this is where, when in open space beta and before that in open space agility, we say, okay, a sponsor who is, hey, I am on the line as an organizational sponsor for making this happen, for making a agile transformation, that doesn't exist, to make an agile transformation happen, or adoption. And that comes from a sponsor doing the messaging, doing the leadership storytelling, and the top management saying, this is where we're going. We're writing the first chapter of this story of the organization that's going on. And then you open space for that to have people say, this is how we want to do it in this place. I want to do it here. And then you have multiple places where people talk about that. Then you have a period of experimentation, of learning, of practice, and that kind of stuff. And you come and you observe that and do the same thing in the end. So that is what we're talking about, the imposition of, this is the big thing, right? And are you in? And if you're not in, there's no sanction, there's no stuff like that. So I think this is a little splitting hairs.
Yeah, no, I want to address that. I want to address the splitting hairs. It's not splitting hairs, and it's important to recognize why I'm saying this. And I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people misinterpret what I'm saying, which means I'm not saying it well. This is, by the way, another brilliant insight that's obvious. The people who get to decide whether you're understandable or not is not you or your editor. It's based on the people who are listening to it. If they don't understand it, it wasn't understandable. Okay, so I didn't say it right. So here's what I mean. I'm not splitting hairs. What I'm saying is I agree with you. The type of imposition you're talking about, we don't want to do.
Right.
But the reason I make a distinction between impositions is because if you don't, then people don't understand that different kinds of imposition are good and different kinds of impositions are bad. And they understand that some are good, and they confuse the issue. So if we clarify that, look, imposition of reality, well, that happens. Imposition of the corporate goal and vision, that happens. But imposition of how to get there, that's a bad thing. So it creates clarity. So I'm not trying to split hairs. I'm trying to create clarity in how we think about things. And I totally agree. I'm not saying the type of imposition you're talking about is a okay thing. It isn't. I'm totally in agreement with you. I'm saying it's important to make distinctions.
Yeah.
So you can understand better why what you're saying is true.
Yeah, distinctions are critical, and having precision about language, and to ensure understanding, and then to say, you don't need to understand. You don't. You don't have to understand. Know that I'm right. I'm right. Everything will be fine in the end. And whether or not it will, this whole idea of engagement and agency and decision making from the people doing the work, there is no respect. And I think that's also key here, is
That
that if me as an individual doing the work, if I'm getting signals from above that do this, do that, and the other, with no, and that I don't respect this person, that they don't know what I do, they don't care what I do,
That's
they
right.
have, and I don't trust them. So the gaining of trust happens over a long period of time, building the relationship, but you lose trust like that when you violate it.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it comes from.
And it's important to know, you know, first impressions, they say if you have a negative first impression, it takes something like 5 good things after that to overcome it. So when you go in and the first thing you say is, you've got to follow to understand I'm the authority, and then you'll understand me because I'm so smart. Now that last part's never said, but it is said subconsciously by the person you're talking to. And it reminds you of, well, I'm your dad, you're going to do what I say, or I'm your teacher, you're going to do what I say. It all happens psychologically. This is the part that Agile tends to ignore. So we have to diagnose, and this is where I do want to share my screen. I just want to show this as an example. I'm not turning into a thing, but I've got to say share screen before you can do that. Okay. So part of Amplo, I want to be really clear too when I talk about Amplo, because I realize I've not done a good job explaining it. Amplio is not something to abandon what you're doing and go to. I know everybody else does that, you know, or not everybody else. DA doesn't do that. Discipline Agile can overlap anything. But most things do that. Theory constraints, you know, the people I really respect, they don't force you to stop what you're doing. They give you a different context within which you could do. So Amplio is kind of a system to build your own framework, in a sense, to use as that'll adapt and all that. But the first thing you have to do is the GPS. So I'm not going to go through this diagram. I know it's pretty complicated. This is kind of my answer to SAFE's big picture, where it's along the value stream analysis here. You know, these are the different, and it's not linear, you know, I put feedback loops in, but of course it's not even this. This looks like the original waterfall paper at some level. These are all over the place, but then this whole thing would be grayed out with feedback loops if you want to. And it's got all sorts of rules about little things, and it's very agile. But the point is, I needed a place to put the things. And what I do, and I just wanted to show this because I think it makes it clear. This is from what I do is I literally, and I've been doing this since 2019 when I came up with this idea. I had done value stream mapping for years, but I had to give up value stream mapping because as a consultant, I was only given a couple hours access to a few people, and I couldn't really find what the problems in the organization was. So I had used other techniques, this thing called cafe conversations and just dialogue, but I found this worked really well. So this is designed for the consultant, and the ACE, as I call it, Amplio Consultant Educators. And what we do is we talk. So imagine you've got these directors, team leads, middle management in between, all in the room. And you say, well, what we want to do is focus on success. You know, we need to establish our critical stakeholders criteria. Who are they? What are the strategy?
Can you zoom on that amber egg there so we can see it a little better?
What amber egg?
In the middle of the screen, because I can't read it now. Yeah, there you go. Could you zoom a little more?
Zoom.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call. Oh, it is amber, sort of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you do this, and you know what I would do is I would bring these up, but I would also know to ask certain questions. And I'm just diagnosing. I'm not trying to come up with any solution. I'm also not trying to even explain what any of these things are. They typically know what you mean. Who are the critical stakeholders? Okay, yeah. They may not understand what strategic pillars are. So I just say, well, these are the things you're going to invest in based on your strategies. Like, is it more customers, better retention, saving money, whatever that is? And
well,
you talk to people. They can identify what's wrong.
Well, I mean, you're really talking about design thinking here. I mean, and at this place, you're talking about empathize,
I'm
define.
consistent with
Well,
design
you're consistent
thinking.
with that. But this is organizational design thinking.
That's right.
Or project design. You're empathizing, you're understanding, right? You're understanding, then you're defining the problem.
That's right.
With accordance, and then you're ideating around potential solutions, and then prototyping and testing. Right, all that stuff that happens in the design thinking.
That's right. I'm doing all that stuff that happens in design thinking, and I apologize. I should have said yes, Ryan. Thank you so much. That's exactly what I'm doing, except I didn't get it from design thinking. And I
Sure.
didn't make this up. I learned this from Fernando Flores back in the 80s, where he had something that I think is easier to understand and better to use, which was a company was that called Logan App. That's just part of what I inject into the Amplio system, the Amplio University. But you're right. I'm doing what design thinking portends to do, but I think I'm doing it in some ways better because there's another theory underneath how I do this that I learned. I studied with him for a couple of years. Well, not unfortunately, I'm glad he seems to be happier having gone back to Chile. He was a political prisoner of Chile from years ago when Chile was overthrown. He's since gone back. But anyway.
We also have a comment about imposition here. I think it's important.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Building trust. Yep.
Yeah, well, you bring up Toyota. There's a very interesting thing about if you study how Toyota kind of brings in new employees, one of the things they impose on people is you have to figure out how to improve your way of working. It's an imposition. It's very interesting. I remember studying this about, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago, and I was like really shocked. I thought, oh, people would love to go into Toyota and they'll be listened to and their ideas will be adopted and all that's wonderful. And then when you see the education process, the thing they have to overcome is that a lot of the line workers just want to be told what to do. And they force them to start thinking about their workflow and improving it because they're right there. They know it better, but they feel uncomfortable. So the imposition is they create a safe environment. They explain it to people. And this brings up a lot of the points you were talking about. Anyway, so here I then go, I mentioned customers are done. But then I go to and I also talk about we're going to expand. So there's then strategy and budgeting. And let me expand this one. So what's interesting, I remember the first time I tried this at an open space. I did it at an open space because I wasn't sure this idea would work. It turns out it did. I was very impressed. And since then I've used it because it's a lot faster than value stream mapping, which I love. I gave up value stream mapping in 2014 as a way to identify problems after having used it for almost a decade by that point, because I learned lean in the 80s as well. Toyota had studied it in Deming. But the problem I had was I could never get enough people for long enough. And I would not really understand. I needed a higher view of doing things. Now, there are people who can get the time, but I never figured out how. So I had to come up with this technique. This was about my third attempt at how to do it, but I really like this and it works. Is what I found was that people could, when you bring up, okay, now we got to figure out strategy and budgeting. What this means is we've got to look at lean leadership. What are our strategies? And I just ask them. I don't train them. You got to be careful. I'll spend 5 minutes on this. I'll spend 5 minutes on this. I'm asking them, how are you doing? And they would put stickies on here. Okay. And there are actually ways to do this in a virtual collaboration board we have that runs in parallel to this. I use Lucid, and you have a GIF of this, or not a GIF, but a JPEG of this, and you just put stickies on top.
Yeah.
The thing that was interesting to me is if you talk high enough level, they have a sense of what you're talking about enough to identify what their problems are. So at the end, you go through, and I'm not going to go through the rest. I just wanted to give you the example. Oops. Oh, then sometimes there's a concept you have to teach. I'm not going to do this, but in teaching the consultants, I have to teach a problem. There's a problem when you have lots of stakeholders and lots of team members where these people have to, the product owners, it's multi-billion-dollar organization. These are, coat and tie people, and these are, developers. We're probably using the wrong icon to show them with a tie.
I would say, and I think this is in terms of I explaining Amplio to people and saying, you don't have to get rid of everything else, but these are the things that aren't included in the 14-page book, right? These are the things that guide an understanding of the organizational context.
Yeah.
That guide the adaptability. Okay, so again, depending on what we say about how much of Scrum do you adopt and how soon, but these are the real issues that you face in the world.
That's right.
And
when you don't
because I'll bring you back to your onion there for a second, that there is an underlying assumption that the top management wants to keep their entire organization structure the same. right? Because that, and this is what, again, what we teach in the more radical decentralization approach, is that budgeting in complexity is a waste of time, money, energy, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and actually, when we
Beyond
get to it,
budgeting and all that kind of stuff, but that is, again, if a top management has an appetite to do that, and that, so that, but that's a whole other thing. But this is imposing reality, right? This
yeah,
is so
and the reality, I love it. I love your comments, Ryan, because it's like there's the reality of the world, and then there's the reality of the mindset of these executives you're talking about. So what you have to do is show what's in it for them. So we still have budgeting and allocation in Amplio, but we do it in an effective way. But I model after beyond budgeting. Okay. And we don't go as far as they do, but I recommend going as far as they do. But anyway, the point is you have existing problems with people caught in the middle who have a hard time talking to these people. Can either usually talk to, directors of hundreds of millions of dollars, divisions versus, your techies. And we find that they do project management. So anyway, we came up with a solution. I just sometimes in the Amplio workshop, when we talk about how this is a concept. I did this based on a presentation back in 2008, but that's not the point. The point is this is how to do it. But I'm gonna then we keep going. See, I needed to explain a concept. So normally, if that was more for the consultants. If you were talking to executives, I wouldn't do that. I would just go from this band to this band. In fact, I need to, now that I'm thinking about it, I should put what I'm going to do. See, it keeps getting better. You can spend more and more time on things. I realize just in doing this now is what would make sense is to have a little bump here that says, go to the next band. So the consultant, while they're doing this, can go through this or not go through this. See, these kind of tools are useful to have. And being purposely incomplete isn't any doing people favors.
Well, and this is also the kind of thing. Well, every year you get safe 6, safe 7, safe 7.1, and all that stuff, and that the knowledge is static for that year, and then up you can't train, and you have to train this stuff, and you have to use our slides to train it. But again, what you're talking about is adapting based on practitioner experience, based on all these kinds of things. What do we observe? What do we see? And learning, uncovering better ways of explaining what is happening and how to do it. So,
I'm glad you said that, because the other thing is, and then I'll come to my point too, because I do have one. The other thing is all the slides when you're in the program you could use. The only thing that you can't is you can't take away the logo and you can't take away the copyright, but in your program. So I do license-free materials. I mean, if you want to keep going with it, like if you're a training organization, then you have to pay to continue. It's $800 every 6 months. It's not a lot. But the point is there is this diagnosis ability. And then from the diagnosis, you can create from a set of patterns. I actually call them capabilities. These are things you need to be able to do. And I'm not going to show the list, but there's a set for every one of those bands. Each of those capabilities, each of those little sets of words up there was a capability. Like you have to do budgeting, or you have to, or on time budgeting. I'm not inconsistent with what you and Niels do. Or you have to have certain roles, or you have to have, classes of service. Maybe you don't have to, but it's an option and it's a useful idea. So then the question is, how do you implement that? Well, you implement that by looking at a pattern that implements that in any number of ways. So what you now have is you've identified all the capabilities. You've done a diagnosis to see which ones you have and which ones you don't have. And what goes on then is I've got this diagnosis. I see we're doing these badly. I'm not then doing these capabilities. Well, then what are the patterns I could use? So patterns being solutions to recurring problems in a context. So I can decide which solution that the pattern is presenting to me for this context works. Now, this is a leap, but if you have the right tool, and this is something we have, and actually it's in an Excel sheet now, we talk about putting it elsewhere, but Excel sheets have an advantage. You can describe all those. Oh, for planning, we're doing this. For budgeting, we're doing this. Now what you have is kind of a framework that you use. It's an agreement of how you're working. but it's an adaptive framework because you started with it based on your needs. As you learn more, you can change what you're doing based on you learn more, go a little deeper and better, or maybe you learned this one wasn't such a great idea after all. But as your needs change, see, this is the thing that's ignored in the agile space. It's not just there's a curve called learning and you can do more. There's also called people are changing. I need to bring them in. There's also called people get more capable as time goes on. It's also called, hey, my company is transforming. That little startup is attacking our market. We need to adjust to it. And now our needs are different. And you're going to try to do this with an immutable framework? I'm sorry, that is insane. That is
And people
insane.
change at different rates for different reasons, for different needs, because they have
That's
status needs, affiliation needs, all those kinds of wants, needs, worldviews, and those things we talk about. We're actually dealing with random carbon units here, not with artificially, computers or little, electric, devices. So,
well, you just said something. I love that random carbon units.
Yeah, Joe.
But
I
here's
have
the
to.
problem.
Joe Little.
I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant. But here's the problem. Those. How did you describe the computers?
Well, the units of silicon and silicon
Okay.
electricity.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem. The way computers show up is somewhat defined by the random carbons that were driving it, and those random carbons are probably not the same as you, random carbon.
Right.
So I
Exactly.
talk about this with innovation as well. Is that this way we innovate in the agile space is crazy, uh, or that we don't. So these two go together. That you got to recognize if I'm going to solve my problems, I have to run a diagnosis. And then I have to have a way to do the diagnosis and a way to create. I do need something to hold on to that I'm doing. You cannot have a large organization where you're just abstractly filling it out. No, you need something solid. You need, here's how you do this. But then you need to be able to change the way you do this as you learn more. That's what I mean by an adaptable framework. And
And
it's
that's making agreements. It's making agreements instead of prescription. Well, I mean,
it's
again,
people. It's ironically people over process, but actually it's recognizing that process affects people. So the two, it's a circular. That's why I've always said it's people and process, because the system you're in affects how you're working. So you have to make sure you're in a good system, and you have to adjust it for the people. And to say no, this is fixed. Now I know there's some people out there saying, yeah, but Scrum gives you the framework and you fill it all out and all that. But first of all, Scrum is not a universal approach. Scrum was designed for cross-functional teams. I mean, people say, "Oh, it works with complex systems," but well, sure, it works to help complex problems. I understand that, but every problem in a knowledge work is complex to some extent. But the point is, it's for cross-functional teams that are early adopters that don't have much outside influence, that can actually plan ahead at least a week, and the only real outside influence is driving from the market and the customer, and that doesn't describe where we are now.
And the people on that cross-functional team have a level of respect for one another's mastery, and they are also likely more senior to be able to understand what self-management means and to know when self-management, what needs to be managed, what do we have flexibility with, what is adaptable, and what if we tinker with the stability of a process and a practice, what are the negative impacts of that? What are the downstream impacts? So, and those are all unarticulated assumptions within Scrum as
Can you share my screen again? I want to show
Sure.
something that people should. I really suggest you read this paper. This is the paper.
Original paper.
This is what inspired Scrum by Jeff and Ken's. I guess more Jeff, but here, I'll put it in the private chat. There we go.
Okay.
So this is the new. They're not stuttering. The new product development game. What's the new way of building new products? And this is where Scrum gets its name, by the way, is look right here. See, rugby. And it was about This is where Scrum gets its name. It's this idea that you're trying to go in this direction and you have an idea of where you're headed, but you have to adjust to the problems that are being presented to you. What's really interesting. Ooh, isn't this interesting? You can see Scrum underneath Scrum. What's interesting is this laid out a particular situation where this works. And nowadays, most teams don't meet this. Now, this doesn't mean these ideas are wrong. These ideas are brilliant. There's a lot of great stuff in Scrum. But what it means is you have to pay attention. This was a team process, not a organization process. And in fact, starting at the team can be a bad thing. That's another insane thing. Team problems are not the same thing as as organization problems. And then to say, well, you can do scrums and all this, that's like saying the subatomic forces are the same as galactic forces because you've got little bits in a biggest space. No, structure does not imply forces. So you might have a team and then a team of teams and then team of teams. And structurally, they're similar, but operationally, they're quite different. Anyway, look, why don't we just, I'd like people to ask questions. I think I've made my 2 points. My 2 points are you need to diagnose, and it's insane if you don't. And you need a framework that adjusts as you do because your needs are going to change.
And so Frederick had made a comment here. I believe this is when we were talking about alternative approaches, possibly. I think that's when that came in. I'm not familiar with the checking.
I haven't heard that either.
Methodology. So, Frederick, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. We have a few folks out there. Let's see if we have questions.
Yeah, I'd rather get questions if they're out there, but I'm happy to hear that there are other approaches. Yeah, by the way, it's interesting. People sometimes say, oh, I'm saying I've got the only way. Let me, before the record, say no. Ryan works with Neil Smiling on that book he showed. I'm sure that's brilliant because he's brilliant, both of them. You've got people who have come up with their own approaches. And I'm always recommending at least a half a dozen other people. There are lots of ways to go at this because, there are a lot of different reasons, both for effectiveness and for other financial reasons. I'm trying, and this is one point I didn't make. Sorry, I got to say this. What's keeping us down in some ways, and I've talked about this before, is this thing I call the technology gap. The fact that there's a lot of stuff we know how to do, but it's not being done. And the reason it's not being done, in my opinion, is because people haven't been educated in it, because the cost of education in the Agile space is just way too high. And that's something I'm trying to change as well. And I mean, like 90% drop. I'm not selling my approach on cost, but I'm saying what we need to do is to overcome disempowering beliefs and add new things. And to do that, you need to get widespread education. Okay, I'm sorry. So
this is a question coming from your stream from Rick E. Green. Rick, I can't really put your name up here. Rick has a curiosity.
Yeah, diagnose with customers so they can stumble over the needs themselves. No, that's actually how you run it. It's what I call a collaborative engagement. Now, I guess you could say two things. You could be asking two questions. So let me answer them both. One is, I've already put all that stuff up there, and you could say, well, they should figure out they need that. The problem is, I could if I had a day, but I'm trying to do this in an hour. So what I do is I don't tell them they need it. I mention something that I know they have a sense of needing. Like they know there's a budgeting issue. I know there's a prioritization issue. I know there are those things, and I know they know those things. So I prime the pump, so to speak, just enough so that they can get a sense of it. And then I ask them, what else is there? Remember, I'm asking them to tell me what the problems are. I'm not saying, I use that as a way to tell me what their problems are. I start with, what are your problems? Because that they know. So they're stumbling across their problems right up front. That's important. They know their problems. They don't know their solutions. So they don't know the needs they have. They don't know what they need. They don't know it exists.
Mm-hmm. The unknown unknowns, the unarticulated needs.
Yeah, but they do know their problems.
They know the symptoms.
They know the symptoms. And a trained consultant. See, here's the other thing I didn't say. It's important to run the diagnosis in a way that's collaborative. I call it a collaborative engagement because you're not telling them what their problems are. You're asking them what their problems are. And then you could go into showing maybe you can create an improvement backlog, as I call it. But you do all this together. This is really important. This takes a certain degree of skill. This is what I teach, how to do this. But when you create this, the people using the result, it's simpler for them. It's as simple as Scrum, but it's been tailored to, it's as simple from a defined point of view, this adaptable framework, but it's easier to work with because it fits them. It's fit for purpose. In other words, look, maybe people are here and maybe this is where they need to go. But you do need to, there's not a one way to get to where what would be effective. Maybe they need to change some. Maybe the organization needs to change some. Maybe you have a better practice. The disparity between how to get something done varies a lot on the people involved. So to say, oh, yeah, the company needs to change, but that doesn't necessarily mean they need to change to your approach.
Well, there was one best way back in 1910 when Fred Taylor and Henry Ford needed to make a bunch of cars, which was an approach that was appropriate for the time. It was an approach that there was no structure and all these kinds of the anti-patterns, what we would say now, that Taylor and Ford through what happened in the industrialization of the auto industry ameliorated that problem. But that effectiveness of that one best way became less and less and less as markets changed, as the world became more complex, as people's needs became more complex, and complicatedness and complexity, again, how those dance together. But yeah.
Share my screen again. I just searched for the soft systems methodology of checkline. Yeah. This is like, I think what you were saying is there's this mapping that you can use, a mapping process of it's to get underneath it all. And some of this also depends on our reality, our view of reality. One of the things that Amplio is based on is Ellie Goldratt's notion of inherent simplicity. That underneath all of this is a few things. And that's a great question. Customers do know symptoms. You could argue they do not really know the upstream underlying problems. I wouldn't argue it. I'd say absolutely, that's true. But if you're trained in what problems cause what symptoms, then you as a consultant could gear toward this. And in fact, that's kind of what we do. Or I'll pull up one more thing. You might as well just keep that up there. There's what we call, oh, no, wrong thing. I'll get into Lucid. So this is one of the tools we give to do this. See right here, the Amplio GPS. And so when you show that thing, this looks familiar, right? So when you show this first in PowerPoint, what you're also doing is you're creating with these stickies. See how these are color coded? You're creating with the stickies the problems in these areas. And then there's a set of, I mentioned this, but I'm just going into it a little more, that, yeah, you have to deal with these realities of things. And the reality is, just I'm pulling it up here, the reality is that because it's based on Goldratt's rules of inherent simplicity, there turns out that there are a set of capabilities. So here, I'll pull this up again. You can see the color coding bands. Just trying to show that sorry. So this has all been worked out. So a consultant can go in and tie the things together. So you see how these are color coded here. These are the capabilities. These are the things I've talked about here. So you look at this, you let them see what their problems are. Then the consultant has to go back and see what these connections are. And then you could start discussing the
Well, you
underlying
can
problem.
teach.
Then you can
Well,
start
Al,
discussing the solutions. I'm sorry, what?
well, Al, can't you teach all this in like a week
Oh,
of
2 days. Yeah,
4 hours?
definitely. Come in for 2 days. I throw all
Yeah,
this at you, and you're certified. Absolutely. And
and you'll
that's
know it, and you can test on it, and you can be certified in
no,
that.
this is,
You don't have to do that over a period of time and have experience with it and
well, you see,
practice. No,
that's he's pulling my chain because he's
little bit sarcasm, a little bit sarcasm there.
well, yeah, it was good. I like that. I like that. It was great. So Amplio is not a 2 day course or a week course. It's a 6 month program. It's a 6 month program. Ampliopoly. Yeah, Thomas loves that. That wasn't my intention, but it sure does look like that.
Yeah.
But no, this is the whole idea. You have to learn over time. There's a lot of stuff here to learn. And
Yeah.
I guess we can close with this because I wrote something like this. A lot of people are scared out there, and I would be too. I'm fortunate. I could have retired. I don't, just because I love what I'm doing and I'm trying to make a difference here.
Yeah.
But things are going to get worse following stuff, because AI is not going to be the answer. Everybody's talking about how AI is going to be the answer. It's not, in a variety of ways. It's a very useful tool. I like AI. I use AI. In fact, we're starting to dump all of the Amplio stuff into an AI tool, so you can ask questions of it to see, what do I do here or there? And I'm putting it in its own place, because a lot of the things in Amplio aren't anywhere else that's popular anyway. I mean, people like Wolfram Mueller, Peter Merrill, Steve Tendon, they've got a lot of good ideas too, but some things are somewhat unique or almost here. But the point is that you have to learn over time. You have to learn something, try it, make a mistake or understand it, then get feedback. So this is the way Amplio University is designed. Learn what you want, but over time, where you can go through those cycles. And the way we teach now, using in class or small classrooms, is so expensive. This is why I say we need to drop education costs. I'm not competing with Amplio on price. I mean, I do only charge $900 for the first 6 months, where you get basically 5 or 6 like DAVSC, Scrum at Scale, PSM2, Safe RTE. You got all that stuff plus some more coaching class. I'm not having a low price. That'd be like $10,000 just about. And this is live training, by the way. But what I'm doing it for is because we need to educate the community. And I'm not even saying Amplio, I'm certainly not the only place. And I'm not even saying it's the best. I pulled from other things. But what I'm saying is we got to drop education. Now, some places, I'm not saying there's not a place for consultants. Sometimes it's, in fact, a lot of times, take somebody good, go into an organization and work with them on a day-to-day basis so you can interact with everybody. That's expensive. That price isn't going to come down.
Yeah.
But getting people knowledgeable about the basics, that needs to be dirt cheap, because otherwise we're not going to get the masses. This stuff should be being taught in high school or college. It shouldn't be being taught now after we're professionals.
Yeah, and this is very interesting. You bring that up too, as we bring our jam session to a close.
Yeah.
Gene Gendel and I talked about this on the live stream a couple weeks ago, about bringing what we're talking about with the bleeding edge of practice into university courses, into webinars and presentations, adjunct faculty at universities. And these are opportunities for those who are consultant educators and who are in the consulting practice, who can augment what they're doing in practice and be able to give back into the community. And whether it's through Amplio, because that's the flavor we like, or whether it's through Xscale or Tameflow or being a blue dolphin, like Wolfram is. So there are a lot of ways to do this. And again, you're spot on that education is this key. And education just doesn't happen by thrusting information at someone and expecting them to turn that into knowledge within 16 classroom hours. So.
Yeah. And, the reason I mentioned AI is it's going to get worse because people are going to think that's an answer, but it isn't an answer. But that's going to allow, the layoffs are going to keep happening. The way to protect yourself is to learn how to be more competent. And you can't wait until you have a job. That's how you get a job.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to Amplio, it's very reasonable. Also, I will say I let people defer half the tuition until they get a job if they're currently looking. And also, I keep mentioning this. I haven't gotten many. I did get somebody, I'm happy to say. If you're a vet, or you're a spouse of a vet, or you're in active duty, I waive the tuition completely. It's 100% free to join the university for vets, American vets, because I had a son in the 101st. He was on active duty when Iraq and Afghanistan were hot, and I know what it's like to go through, have a family member in active military, and I want to. That is where I want to pay back. So let people know about that. Anyway, Ryan, I really liked today's session. I just love interacting with you. I got to say, you're such a wise, smart guy, and maybe we should flip that. But I appreciate that.
Thank you. It's fun. I love jamming with you, and bringing such a voluminous amount of information that we can help folks understand and absorb and turn into knowledge, and to be able to apply that in practice. I think that's a gift we can give to the world, and it's a cool thing.
I'm sorry, one last thing. Next Tuesday, and sorry for the people in the ACOP, I got to send another email out. On Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock, it's free. You can come live, Amplo Community Practice. I'm going
8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. for those of us in the Far East.
I'm going to be doing a case study of how I used SAFE back in the day. And it'll be interesting if you want to see. You could also use it as how to fix SAFE if you're in that. I'm going to be writing about that, so look at my feed later today.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here, everybody, and thanks, Ryan. I just always look forward to these sessions. They're always fun and educational.
Educational for both of us. Thank you for the precious gift of you being here, and thank you out there for the precious gift of your time and attention. Peace out, folks.